So I now welcome representatives from Good Ancestors Policy and Harmony Intelligence. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard records, will you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today? Mr. Sadler first.
I'm Greg Sadler, the CEO of Good Ancestors Policy.
I'm Sarush Paul, and I'm the CEO of Harmony Intelligence.
Good, thank you. If you'd like to make some brief opening statement, and then I'll open up the senators for questions.
Great, thank you, Senator. So, as I said, I'm Greg Sadler, the CEO of Good Ancestors Policy. Good Ancestors wants to help us all be good ancestors to future generations by making forward-looking, evidence-based and practical policy recommendations. As part of that goal, I coordinated the submission from Australians for AI Safety, and Sarush was one of the signatories. When we talk about safety, we mean physical harm to people or infrastructure, especially at a large scale. The same meaning of safety as in aviation safety. These are the kinds of issues that the CEOs of all the top AI companies and key academics raised last year in widely publicised open letters. Submissions to this inquiry, the public and experts overwhelmingly agree that safety needs to be a priority. I want to focus on what those safety concerns are and how we can practically address them. To make good policy, we need to think about the models of tomorrow. In the Good Ancestors submission, we present evidence that AI capabilities have grown rapidly and unpredictably. That capability growth is likely to continue or to accelerate. And we should anticipate that some of those new capabilities will be dangerous. This could be because they are misused, or in the future, we could lose control of highly capable AI systems. Biosecurity is perhaps the most useful example to start understanding misuse risks. In 2017, a leading laboratory manufactured an extinct relative of the smallpox virus using DNA that they'd ordered online. Today's AI is on the cusp of being able to help thousands of people to do what was only possible previously in those leading labs. In March 2022, a paper was published in Nature Machine Intelligence detailing how an AI intended to find new drugs instead designed 40,000 novel and lethal molecules in less than 6 hours. Similarly, a 2023 study showed that students were able to use ChatGPT to suggest potential pandemic pathogens, explain how they could be made from DNA ordered online, and supply the names of DNA synthesis companies unlikely to screen orders to ensure they don't include dangerous DNA sequences. The study also showed that GPT's safeguards failed to prevent it from providing that kind of dangerous assistance. It's realistic that AIs could help people build bioweapons during the next term of government. The US has taken action to address this safety risk, including through an executive order in October 2023. I've raised this issue with several departments, but have not seen any evidence of ownership of this risk in the Australian system or an intent to follow the US in implementing targeted safeguards. Similar misuse concerns arise around other capabilities like cyber offence. While GPT 3.5 had limited cyber offensive capability, a series of papers published earlier this year showed that GPT-4 was able to autonomously hack websites and exploit 87% of newly discovered vulnerabilities in real-world systems. If developers create future generations of AI systems with advanced cyber offensive capabilities and inadequate safeguards, it would dramatically change the cyber landscape. But there are practical things we can do to address these safety concerns. Establishing an Australian AI Safety Institute based on the UK model that focuses on frontier safety is the first step. An AI Safety Institute would help tackle uncertainty by contributing to the evaluations necessary to understand next-generation systems and brief policymakers accordingly. Finally, we have useful overseas models that can help us regulate AI in Australia. Canada and EU have useful definitions of high-risk AI and general-purpose AI systems with systemic risk that will let us target regulations only at risky models and avoid harmful overregulation. Californian Bill SB 1047 has specific proposals that we could adopt, like requiring the most advanced AI models to undergo safety testing, requiring developers and deployers to shut down AI models in certain circumstances, and mandating safety incident reporting like we currently do in the aviation industry. We have to get ahead of these problems rather than taking a wait-and-see approach that puts an unacceptable risk onto future generations.
My name is Sarush Paul, CEO of Harmony Intelligence. Harmony is an Australian technology startup that works with AI labs and governments to understand and mitigate the risks of AI. We've worked with all of the leading AI labs and are in close talks with multiple G20 governments with a focus on societal scale of risks such as election integrity, cyber attacks, bioterrorism, and AI loss of control. Humanity already faces AI-powered threats but this is just the leading edge of a much larger problem. As AI systems continue to improve exponentially, the scale and sophistication of AI-powered threats will also increase dramatically. Cyber attacks will become more frequent and more severe, making failures like the recent CrowdStrike outage a much more regular occurrence and much more difficult to recover from. Extremists will access much more dangerous weapons capability, like the ability to engineer pandemics worse than COVID. The digital world will no longer be a human space. AI agents are on track to be able to do everything that humans can do, just faster, better, and without moral concerns. While agents do present an economic opportunity, they also are an immense challenge to our society. How do we begin to trust online interactions if on the other side we don't know if we're talking to a disinformation bot or extremely sophisticated cybersecurity attacker? How do we trust critical infrastructure when we don't know how it works? What do jobs, wages, and productivity actually mean in a world with billions of AI workers that don't sleep, eat, or ask about their workers' rights? This sounds like science fiction, but the AI industry is rapidly turning fiction into reality. Generally capable AI models, image generation, and video generation didn't exist just a few years ago. Now they run on my laptop. Just this week, a Japanese AI company alongside Oxford and University of British Columbia researchers created automated AI scientists that can go from researching an idea to a published, peer-reviewed article in a matter of hours and for under $20 a paper, compared to the months and thousands of dollars required of a human researcher today. This accelerates the already rapid pace of AI change. Not only this, these AI scientists immediately try to run autonomously more copies of themselves and to make changes to avoid being turned off. This is not science fiction, and it's exactly the kind of rapid takeoff, loss of control scenarios that leading AI scientists have been warning about for many years. While this scenario is terrifying, we can turn that fear into useful action. Australia needs a world-class AI safety institute focused on these problems. That institute needs deep technical capability and the ability to support whole-of-government responses to these threats. It needs to be paired eventually with a strong regulator that can enforce mandatory policies such as third-party testing, effective shutdown capabilities, and safety incident reporting. Australia also has world-renowned researchers, but compared to the scale of the challenge, they are dramatically underfunded and cannot respond effectively to the challenge. If we do all of this, if we respond effectively, not only can we keep Australians safe, but we can also be a net exporter of AI assurance and defence technologies. Harmony is proving this case every day in our work, and we need government to come with us. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Poor. I might just following up before I hand over to Senator Shoebridge, just one question. In what you're suggesting, and Mr. Sadler may wish to make some comment to this as well, you may have heard some earlier questions asked about the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and that formulates within Australia where there's settled principles amongst business, community, regulators, workplace representatives, workforce. There's a broad understanding of the manufacturing sector, but also a deeper understanding across all sectors of the economy, how that harmonises through regulatory models, which incorporates educational, workplace voice. Is part of, if I sort of at that sort of higher level, what you're saying is that there needs to be an overarching capacity which governments need to be putting into place to make that sort of model a reality.
Yeah, so we already have models for regulating advanced technologies where we have safety concerns, and I think aviation safety is the most sensible model to start looking at. So you can understand, if we think historically, planes are scary. These are technologies that most people don't understand. You can see why people might be hesitant to use them, and they offer tremendous economic benefit. And so the way government builds a framework around this is that we have, a substantial regulator like CASA, and then we have a separate, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, which would be the equivalent of an AI Safety Institute, where you can put the expertise to understand, how many stress cycles can a rivet endure before someone needs to replace it. And so you've got a place to house that expertise. And then you have a separate policy hub in government that translate these things. So we know how to regulate risky technologies, and we can apply those kinds of established frameworks into this situation.
I might just ask you to take on notice, just to think about that concept, and I'll write something over to you about the other part of the concept about how you have workplace participation, because as much as I understand what you're putting to us, and you may want to have some more thought on this on notice, how we incorporate the workplace piece in it as well. So it's actually not running in conflict, because I've got to say the aviation industry, which I deal with a lot, does have regulations, but its impact to enforce is extremely limited. It has some failings on that. There's not an equal playing field between participants in that space. It's not holistic, but I appreciate the point you're trying to make. Thank you, Senator Shoebridge.
Thanks, Chair. And look, thanks both for your submission and your work more broadly and your attendance here. We've had a bunch of submissions point to both Canada and the UK as kind of the most obvious examples to look for a kind of AI safety regulator, if I could put it in those terms. I haven't yet heard the kind of details about the Californian model that you were putting forward. And we know that the EU has taken its own pathway. This is an unfair question, but if you were to pick, where would you say we start our model from?
Yeah, I think it's a very fair question. So I guess what I think both the Canadian legislation and the EU legislation offer us is useful buckets to put different AI models in. And those buckets are important because we need to make sure that we have appropriate regulation on the high-risk models, the models of the future, the frontier models. But we don't want to over-regulate the established models, the models that we know are safe, the narrow models that are already being used. I think we heard evidence this morning about AI being used to help people with hearing impairments, and we don't want AI regulation aimed at the models of next year impacting those things that we have. So this is where the EU AI Act and the Canadian Act are sort of strong. So they've got specific definitions for AI systems that pose unacceptable risks. So like they use examples like social scoring that we just don't want to have in our society. They have definitions for high-risk systems, and they have definitions for general-purpose AI models that pose systemic risks, which is particularly helpful for the kinds of issues that we're talking about with biosecurity and cybersecurity that are sort of the problems for tomorrow. There are some shortcomings with the EU AI Act. For instance, some of the definitions talk about how a model is intended to be used. So in my opening statement, I gave that example of a AI that was intended to help discover novel drugs, but was instead used to discover dangerous molecules. So we need to anchor on the actual capability of models, not how they're intended to be used. But generally speaking, the flexibility that both the Canada approach and the EU approach offer are helpful. Currently, they don't have a huge amount of specifics about what you do. So once you effectively bucket these AIs into definitions, which is the first step, what should you do about it? And that's where I think the Californian bill SB 1047 offers us really practical way forward. So some of the specific things that SB 1047 does is require developers to have a positive obligation to ensure that their models are safe and don't pose a risk to public safety or public welfare. And it says if developers don't go through those safeguarding processes, that they could be held liable for any catastrophic harms that their models do cause subsequently. It puts a obligation on those developers to assist other parties provide third-party verification. So kind of they've got to provide the handbook for how to sort of replicate their testing and prove their capability, which is where a company like Sarush's would be able to step in and provide that third-party review. It talks about shutdown capability. So if we find out that a released AI does have one of these dangerous capabilities, it can help terrorists build bioweapons, they're required to have effective control over their AIs and turn them off in those circumstances. Safety incident reporting, as we mentioned, as well as like policies around computing clusters. So I think that there's really promising stuff in SB 1047 that Australia could look to adopt and adapt into our circumstance and start building a global norm.
Yeah, It's an unfortunate name, isn't it? SB 1047. You think a jurisdiction like California would know how to brand their stuff better, wouldn't you? So it's kind of maybe you're suggesting a little bit of the kind of categorisation that comes out of Canada or Europe, but a little bit of the kind of detail that comes out of California. Is that how I'm reading your submission?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that we're focusing on is what are the risks of these future models, the future highly capable models. And there's sort of an incisiveness to SB 1047 in that it looks forward to these future highly capable models and generally doesn't try and put regulations on models that we know are safe because we don't want to hamper the economic benefit they offer. And
is SB 1047, is it in force? And is it?
No, it's still before the Parliament.
Yeah. Is there a time frame for it? Is there that you're aware of?
I understand that in the next couple of weeks, so it's been actively debated at the moment.
Okay. If one of the pushbacks against this kind of model is, well, it's going to limit our ability to be at the forefront of developing this technology, we'll miss the boat, and we'll miss the innovation, and we'll miss the benefits that comes from the innovation. How do you respond to that sort of, generic critique of this?
Yeah, I think that there's a genuine goal in making sure that Australia can harvest all of the economic benefit and potential of AI. So we're sort of not criticising that at all, and it's a great goal that the Department of Industry is pursuing. So no objection to this. This is absolutely true. But particularly what that sort of EU AI Act definition of general purpose models that pose systemic risks offers us is it talks about the models that don't even exist yet, the models that might be 6 months or 12 months or 2 years or 5 years away, and it gives us a way of defining those models and thinking about the catastrophic risks that they may present. But also we can downgrade those models, right? So if someone launches this model and they go through the safety testing, we see that they're safe, then we can introduce them to our economy in a way that's safe.
As I understand it, part of your pitch in this space, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, is to say if Australia puts in place some credible long-term safety standards that end up delivering good public policy outcomes, that's also a critical building block to developing a distinct industry here, a kind of AI safety certification industry, which I suppose is where you, Ms. Paul, come in. Am I right in understanding you see this as these two things working together?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a lot of reason to believe targeted regulation would not only not hurt the industry but support it, and there's a bunch of evidence in that direction. The first of all is something like a catastrophe or societal harm does not actually leave us better off. The goal of all innovation is for us to be a better society and to live in a more prosperous society. So preventing these things is in and of itself as a benefit. Beyond that, if we actually look at what the companies are doing, many of them are putting into place at least some of these practices themselves voluntarily, and they are doing so because it makes both ethical and economic sense to do so. At some point, some level of coordination is helpful for those best practices to become the norms across the industry, for an ecosystem of auditors, a strong ecosystem of trained developers to be created, and all of those things are supported by high-quality regulation of this kind.
Well, other witnesses have come forward and said actually the one area where Australia has a global competitive advantage in AI and sort of IT programming more broadly is in regulatory software, regulatory programs that assist in, for example, running a hospital or undertaking sort of complex corporate/regulatory responses. This kind of builds on that level of expertise, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And that's, this is exactly what we are exporting at the moment. And I will add briefly that right now we are losing that talent and losing that work to the UK and the US, who are a little bit ahead of us as far as regulating some of these.
You see, if we got slightly ahead of the curve and adopted international best practice, and perhaps in part set some international best practice for AI regulation, that would actually give us a competitive advantage for the industry, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Yes.
Could I then, I don't mean to trivialise this, but what do you see as the kind of the near-term, most significant near-term risks? I know you mentioned the prospect of bioengineering as one. Are there other kind of near-term risks that you could, express to us that might raise the level of urgency inside Parliament to do something?
I could talk briefly about cybersecurity in that context, which I mentioned briefly in the opening statement, but we can unpack a little bit more. So I mentioned this research that shows that the cyber offensive capability of AIs is growing rapidly, and it was sort of negligible with older models, but it's becoming appreciable with current models. So what this sort of recent research shows that AIs can autonomously hack websites that have actually been deployed. It's leveraging a developer interface that OpenAI offers, this particular research, which gives developers access to build AI assistants. And so those AI assistants are designed that you can use a context window to provide some business information about how your procedures work, and then the AI can go along and book your travel or whatever it might be trying to do as an AI assistant. So the researchers leveraged that to provide, rather than context documents about travel bookings, to provide context documents about how to hack websites. And then it lets the AI generate prompts for itself. So the researchers encourage the AI to be creative and try different solutions and persist trying to hack the website even if you initially fail. And using this prompt, the AI was able to successfully hack about 90% deploy 90% of real cybersecurity attacks. So I think the immediate economic harm of this is really tangible, right? So it's currently the case that there's a lot of less sophisticated cyber actors, and so we engage in basic behaviours like updating our passwords and updating our apps to beat those basic cyber adversaries. But if autonomous AIs allow even the basic cyber adversaries to have several rungs up the capability stack of cyber offence, it would completely disrupt Australia's economy, it would completely disrupt Australian small businesses and individuals, and it could even, at the extreme end, be a threat to critical infrastructure. If you read Australia's current cybersecurity strategy, it basically doesn't mention this risk at all, even though that cybersecurity strategy is meant to run out to 2030. So this is definitely something that's on the table next year, let alone by 2030.
So you can kind of start an AI on AI exchange, which you can sort of use a platform's own AI to unravel it. Is that part of what happens in that exchange?
Yeah, so I have heard cybersecurity companies argue, it's okay if the internet is overrun by cyber offensive bots because we'll just build cyber defensive bots of our own, and then you can buy them and we can have a bot-on-bot war on the internet. And I think this obviously sounds ludicrous, right? We're working hard to get everyday Australians to run the latest applications and to update their passwords. Like the idea that my mum or dad would be using cyber defensive bots to keep themselves safe online is just not a future that we want to go into, which is why we're interested in things like an AI Safety Institute. It's why we're interested in things like regulation, because we just don't think this is a path we want to go down.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's come to our attention recently in terms of the proliferation of AI bots is the green cicada AI, which seems to have been generated out of China and has created a whole series of false accounts, bot accounts, that amongst other things have a high interaction rate with Elon Musk's Twitter account. Is that an example of, perhaps not in the cybersecurity space, but maybe in a kind of online democracy, online public debate space where they've already been deployed?
Yeah, so firstly, Senator Shoebridge, I completely agree. I think election disinformation and the use of bots in that domain is a here and now risk and already affecting democracies around the world, so a very real area. The second I would say is on Greg's point about cyber attackers and bots and agents who are able to do this. This is a very real area of concern that even the AI labs are actively working on because they know it's a real risk. And then just one quick final point is whatever is developed here as far as regulation goes will land 12, 18 months from now and will be in place, regulating the threats of the next 5 years, let's say. AI is moving at such a pace that a large proportion of the threats I described in my opening statement will be here, and very real threats at the same time as this AI legislation comes into play, which is why an institute like the AI Safety Institute is so critical. They can move much more quickly.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to hit all the errors in what I say are my errors, but I was having a discussion with Frances Hogan recently from the Facebook whistleblower, and one of the concerns she raised was the platforms are not moving to clean out bot accounts in some of these exchanges. And yet the technology exists to identify bot accounts fairly readily because of the speed with which they respond, the mannerisms, the manner in which they respond, the consistency of their response. And platforms would be able to identify bot accounts and winnow them out. But now I'll put my spin on it, but they're choosing not to, because who wants to get rid of 50 million accounts one afternoon if it suddenly sort of devalues your value proposition when you're selling your product to an advertiser? So could I ask you about those two aspects? One, is it technically possible to actually deploy AI to identify and clean out bots? And secondly, are there those kind of market forces in play?
Great question.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so fantastic questions. I'll address the second part first.
Yeah.
I think there is a very real issue of lack of proper incentives to invest in these technologies. So I run an organization which goes around talking to AI labs, trying to convince them to put in best practices third-party testing. Do we get some engagement? Yes, there is some interest from some of these companies to do something. Is it anywhere near the same level of interest and investment that they are putting in advancing capabilities, popularizing adoption, maximizing their user count? Not even by an order of magnitude, probably. So this is exactly the gap between, voluntary measures and strong incentives enforced by regulation that we need. So very much agree with your second point that we do need to improve the market forces. On the first part, I think the answer is somewhat nuanced, but to put it briefly is there are some tools that are best practices that could be put in place that haven't been put in place, but also there is a whole generation of defensive technologies, responsive technologies that haven't been invented that need to be invested in and invented, and that needs to happen both through market incentives and through government support, things like the AI Safety Institutes.
Yeah, thanks as well.
Good, thank you. Senator Pocock.
Thank you very much for your time here this afternoon. In your submission and then today, you've mentioned a number of times or recommended the establishment of a permanent AI advisory body or institute. I'm interested if you've given much thought to what that should look like, size, expertise, what sort of setup do you have in mind?
Sure. So, one of the concerns here is, as this committee has heard, there's just so many challenges and risks and opportunities that relate to AI. It's such a multifaceted space. And this risk of safety that we're focused on is easy to lose sight of amongst all of those other concerns, including because there's some uncertainty around it, and it's one of these issues that's on for the future. So it's sort of easy to lose it amongst the other sort of issues. So one of the things that we're saying is that this safety issue should have resources ring-fenced and dedicated to it, so that these issues of tomorrow don't get left until tomorrow when it's too late to worry about biosecurity or cybersecurity or election security. So what exactly does that look like? So I think in the bureaucracy, we've got great institutes like the National AI Centre that's focused on the adoption of AI, but you can see why they have that competing requirement with safety. So we think that an Australian AI Safety Institute on the UK model that's tasked specifically to think about these frontier safety risks with next generation models is helpful. So there's sort of three things specifically that we think it could do. Firstly is focus on this idea of evaluation. So what are the capabilities of these models? Do we need to be worried about biosecurity? Do we need to be worried about cybersecurity? How can we red team the assessments that are happening to prove that the capabilities that we're forecasting are correct? The second thing is driving AI safety research. So we think that there's a real gap. Like a lot of the safeguards are quickly defeated. They're not up to safeguarding the kinds of capabilities that future models might have. So currently there's estimates like for every $250 spent on driving AI capability, only $1 is spent on AI safety. So this is a really big gap between safety and capability. So driving AI safety research to actually address these problems before they arrive is critical. And then thirdly, this AI Safety Institute could partner internationally. So we've already seen other countries set up these institutes. We've seen the UK and the US develop partnerships to share their techniques and to share personnel. So if Australia had an AI Safety Institute, we could engage in those technique and personnel sharing arrangements. And I support much of what Microsoft said previously about the sort of the merits of engaging internationally in that space. And there's also second-order benefits to the AI assurance industry that Sarush might want to talk to.
The only point I really want to add is I also think this institute needs to be deeply technical. There is a tendency for a lot of the kind of AI agencies that we set up in various parts of government to actually be very heavily oriented towards policy and law and ethics, and those are incredibly important pieces. But this is ultimately a complex, fast-moving technology, and a big part of what this AI Safety Institute needs to do is be technically capable enough to support whole of government responses and support other departments putting in policy. So deep technical capability is a very important piece.
And what can we learn from elsewhere in terms of independence and funding? What's the best way to actually do that?
Yeah, so we have seen that these AI safety institutes are often sort of appended to Australia's equivalent of the Department of Industry, but they are separate institutes. So I think that executing the safety mandate through the Department of Industry or through the existing National AI Centre is not the way to go. I think that this, to ring fence these resources in the way that I was talking about, it has to be something that is separate, even if that's where it ultimately reports through. I think that Canada, from memory, and I can take this on notice for the precise figure, had sort of put, I think it was like $20 million Canadian into their budget for an AI Safety Institute. So this is a significant investment, but it's not an impossibly large investment, given the scale of what we're talking about.
The UK investment was £100 million initially, and I think it's now been spread out to something on the order of £40 million per year in their budget.
I mean, that seems very doable to me. I think looking at the budget papers, the National AI Centre for the move from CSIRO to the department got $20 million for reshaping. So it seems doable. I know Senator Shoebridge touched on this, but I just wanted to have a question about the urgency when it comes to elections. Something I'm really concerned about, but I'm interested in your view, seeing what's happening around the world. How real is the threat to generative AI, deepfakes? What we're starting to see around the world for an election that is potentially, any time from, I don't know, October to May next year.
How real is the threat? I don't think you'll find anybody who doesn't think the threat is real. It is a weekend project to be able to create, pages and pages of disinformation, to create bots on the internet, and it's within the reach of anyone at the moment with very few real safeguards. And that problem is only getting worse through voice, video, and soon, even more sophisticated capabilities.
And so what do we do? Because what I'm hearing from companies that have a stake in generation and all the rest, they say, this is something we're working on, we're doing invisible watermarks. For me, when it comes to elections, invisible watermarks are basically pointless as far as the public are concerned, seeing things. So do you just rule it out, or what do we do given the time frame?
Yeah, so I think there's sort of a two-phase approach here that, there's a problem now and we need a Band-Aid solution now before the next election, and then we need to think about a more sustainable solution for the long term. So what does the Band-Aid look like? There's a paper from Mr. Andrew Ray from the ANU Law School in 2023, which has practical law reform suggestions, including amendments to the Commonwealth Electoral Act 1918. And so it's got particular suggested changes to Section 329A and 329B. So I'd be happy to take on notice tabling that particular paper from the ANU Law School with its specific proposals. And it navigates issues like how you deal with copyright in this context, how you deal with the freedom of political communication in this context. So that might give us immediate ways forward. But obviously, this is a sustained problem. So we were talking about how much bots might chew up the internet into the long term. So there's some studies that maybe 90% of internet content might be generated by AI by 2026. So it's not very long until the information space is deeply polluted, which is why we need to be tackling this in some substantive ways by having AI safety institutes, by looking at regulation and not waiting until we find ourselves in that world and then thinking how we get out of it.
Thank you. That's really useful. Just had a couple of things I also just want to touch on quickly. We've heard conflicting views on the need for Australia to develop its own sovereign large language model. I'm interested in your views on this.
Yeah, so we've also followed that conversation, and we absolutely understand the urge behind it, right? Like, there's this need to develop skills in Australia. There's need to develop some kind of platform or launch pad so that Australia can participate in this industry. But we don't think that a sovereign, well, at least I don't think that a sovereign large language model is the way to go. So building a current generation large language model probably costs about $100 million. And if Australia earmarked that $100 million today and started building it, it's unlikely that we would get a current generation LLM finished by the time the next generation of LLMs comes out. So we would enter this race and drive this race condition, and we would be behind. The next generation of models might cost $1 billion, and we've seen OpenAI trying to raise $7 trillion for future generations of models. So this isn't a race which I think it's particularly helpful for us to enter. But there are ways for us to achieve the same results, right? How do we generate the skills? How do we have this launch pad? And that's where we think that this AI assurance industry comes in. So building on what Sarush said previously, I saw a report from the UK recently, which estimated that the global AI assurance industry could be worth $276 billion by the end of the decade. So there is a real industry here. It's a real industry that Australia could participate in and is already participating in. And I think investing in this through building an AI safety institute and supporting these kinds of businesses to export AI safety to the world is the way to solve the same problems that instinctively a Australian sovereign LLM would solve.
And so AI Safety Institute, we've talked about the investment piece. Is that sort of early stage grants and then capital, or have you thought through, we're talking National Reconstruction Fund, or have you looked into that more?
Yeah, so in the context of the Australians for AI Safety letter, I talked to a huge number of people currently doing their PhDs in machine learning in Australia, and also people who had graduated. And most of them were looking to move overseas to continue their careers because there wasn't natural homes for these people in Australia, particularly where they were concerned about safety. So if we want to grow this industry, we've got to find some way to keep people here. So I think, obviously, the AI Safety Institute is one way of doing that, but I think that there's enormous talent coming out of Australian universities, but not sort of similar amounts of funding going into Australian universities. So I mentioned that statistic about $1 spent on safety for $250 spent on safety, and there's similar studies or similar sort of statistics about how little Australian research money is going towards AI safety compared to other causes, and I can take on notice providing some of that to the committee. But I think that creating homes for Australian talent to work on these issues is the next step. But Sarush might have more views on growing the industry.
I think short answer, academic funding. So there are some academic homes which will then be translated into commercial opportunities, as well as the kinds of things you're talking about, government procurement of the kinds of assurance technologies that we want, which bootstrap these companies, early stage grants, all of these things can help create that industry.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Good, thanks very much. And thank you again for coming and joining us this afternoon. If you've taken any questions on notice, if you could hand those answers back to the Secretariat by the 30th of August.
If I may, Senator Shoebridge asked a question about legal analysis of the Canadian and EU Act. If I could take on notice providing a good ancestors comparative legal analysis of those two documents that's applied in Australia.
That would be amazing. Thank you.
That would be great. And also, I'm sure that the senators will have, I know there's a few questions I'll put on notice to you as well, but thank you for that. That'd be a great deal of help for the committee. And if you've taken any questions on notice, if you could answer just to the Secretariat by the 30th of August 2024. We'll just now suspend for 5 minutes, which will take us through to 3:10.